Welcome to another episode of Follow the Brand. I am your host, Grant McGaw, CEO of 5-Star BDM, a 5-star personal branding and business development company. I want to take you on a journey that takes another deep dive into the world of personal branding and business development using compelling personal story, business conversations, and tips to improve your personal brand. By listening to the Follow the Brand podcast series, you will be able to differentiate yourself from the competition and allow you to build trust with prospective clients and employers. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. Make it one that will set you apart, build trust, and reflect who you are. Developing your 5-star personal brand is a great way to demonstrate your skills and knowledge. If you have any questions for me or my guests, please email me at grant.mcgaugh, spelled M-C-G-A-U-G-H, at 5-star BDM, B for brand, D for development, M for masters.com. Now let's begin with our next 5-star episode on Follow the Brand.
When you are an entrepreneur, you are driven by the challenge and intrigue of the business journey and financial empowerment. Your reward is the excitement you gain from a genuine feeling of adventure. Graham Brown says his journey started in telecom and communications, which led him to become one of the world's most recognized podcasters. Brown started podcasting as a hobby to reach out to entrepreneurial nomads like himself, which led him to Southeast Asia to meet Billionaire Tony Fernandez of AirAsia to start building a podcast business asset to leverage the human connection. Graham believes leadership is storytelling. Graham helps corporate leaders find their authentic voice through creating their own podcasts and speaking on other creative and interesting podcasts. Graham has posted, guested on, and produced over 2,000 podcast episodes since 2014. A graduate of artificial intelligence and cognitive psychology from Sussex University and entrepreneurship, Harvard Business School, Brown is the founder of Pitch Media Asia, Asia's largest podcast media house, and he is best known for being the show host of Asia Tech Podcast, the podcast show, and Pitch Deck Asia shows, which spans 500 episodes across 15 Asian markets. Graham is also the founder of Podc and Company, award-winning podcast agency and AI-powered, data-driven B2B podcast agency in Singapore. He is also a published author on the subject of the digital transformation of communication works, including the Human Communication Playbook, The Mobile Youth, Voices of the Connected Generation, documenting the rise of mobile culture in the early 2000s in Japan, China, Africa, and India, and also Brand Love, How to Build a Brand Worth Talking About. Brown shares lessons learned from helping some of the world's leading organizations such as McKinsey, UTI, Julius Baer, UPS, and the Singapore government find their voice with podcasts. As an entrepreneur, Brown founded Mobile Youth in 2000, the world's first youth-focused telecoms company, and built it into a multinational company spanning 45 countries. He has appeared on CNN, CNBC, BBC TV, Financial Times, The Guardian, and Wall Street Journal. A prolific public speaker, he has spoken on topics ranging from marketing innovation to early-stage startup investment. Throughout his exciting career, he has helped shape the marketing strategy of clients such as UNICEF, MTV, the European Commission, Disney, and Monster Energy drinks, and even participated in the rollout of the world's first consumer mobile internet services on NTT Docomo's iMode in Japan during the 1990s. A student of the world, Brown has lived in countries such as New Zealand, the UK, Spain, Japan, and Singapore, and speaks fluent Japanese, Spanish, and English. Let's welcome Graham Brown to the Follow the Brand podcast, where we are building a 5-star brand that you can follow.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another great episode on Follow the Brand. You know, we're international. I don't know a lot of people knew that, but we are international. We started out here in Little Miami, Florida, and we went throughout the nation, and we have been reaching across the pond. We just had some guests from all the way over in Europe. Now we're going to go way out to the into the Pacific, and you know these islands. I think they're called the Philippines or Singapore or something like that. They're out in a no man's land for me. But we're going to have Graham Brown come to the show. He has been an historical podcaster. I call he's the pioneer in my world. I mean, he's been doing this for a very, very long time. He teaches others how to do it at a high level. And he's been able to attract a lot of corporate sponsors and people that are large corporations that are looking to get into the podcasting realm and do it at a level that they can truly share some knowledge, share some intelligence, and bring, whatever they're bringing to the table, their brand to the table at a much higher level. So without further ado, let's hear from Mr. Graham Brown.
Hey, Grant. It's great to be here. Yeah, greetings from Singapore. So, yeah, you got the Pacific part right. We are on the other sides of the world. So Follow the Brand, folks, is going international. We've got global coverage. Follow the sun coverage now.
Now, and you have an interesting story. I know you've been there a few years, and you've tracked over there. Now, I want to know, how did you get out to the Philippines? I mean, of all the places,
Singapore.
I know.
I know it's the same area.
It's generally. Well, let's talk about that. What is it, like a few miles, hundreds of miles, or is it sight distance? How far is Singapore from the Philippines?
So it's probably like from yours to Chicago, or maybe further out.
Further out. Yeah. But it's a big place. Right? It's a big place.
It's far. You got to cross the ocean as well. So but we're all in Asia. I mean, we're all in Southeast Asia.
Correct.
That's the region. Correct. I mean, Asia itself, there's half the world's population here.
It's more than half the world, if I remember right. I mean, there are a ton of people that live in that part of the world, and it just really expands your awareness. So tell us, where do you hail from? Where'd you get your start?
I'm from England, yeah. I was born in England many years ago, but I haven't lived there for almost 10 years. And it was 2012, I had a telecoms business, which it came sort of the end of its lifetime. So it was a successful telecoms business involved in communications marketing, and helping large telcos in their communication strategy. And then 2012, I sold everything, my share in the business, sold all our, worldly goods. So clothes, the car, the house, everything. And then myself, my wife, and my 6-year-old son, we went traveling. So we decided we'd go and see a bit of the world, because I didn't want to start another business. And I didn't really have the appetite to get back into it. So we packed everything into 3 suitcases, Grant, literally 3 suitcases, and then bought a one-way ticket to New Zealand and traveled the world for 6 years. So that was the story. So we went everywhere, living on islands, living, out in remote places, got my son into school in some of the local schools, settled him in, these sort of hilltop schools in Spain, like got him into one of those, like learn from the locals, live with the locals. Yeah, and had a bit of an adventure. So that's the story. And then ended up in Asia, Japan. My wife's Japanese. And then we moved to Singapore 3 years ago. So that's the story. It's not a straight line.
Oh, man, not at
the most
all.
Interesting stories.
No, it sounds very intriguing. I mean, I'm picturing you, with a backpack, and you're going through Europe, and then you're getting on these little boats, right, with this your wife and your child, and you're going to these little islands, and you're
negotiating with the captain for payment. Everything's haggling and bargaining, and yeah.
So
That's the life.
now we have some more commonality in our backgrounds. I have a large telecom history. I worked for Lucent Technologies for like 10 years. So I got my start, in the IT world from a communication standpoint. So I understand telco at a pretty high level, whether it's at a carrier world or a PBX world or a VoIP world and all that type of thing. And now here we are talking about podcasting, which is a form of communication, right? Right. So now
absolutely.
You got to segue into that story. Like, so did you have to get on the mic to talk your way through to get on a passage to another country? I mean, how did this happen?
On an old steamer ship, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think the telecoms background really, is interesting as well. We talked about this before, didn't we, Grant? Is that, in the old days of telecoms, a lot of the telcos, came from different areas. They were tech companies or even old, the old sort of network exchanges like the Bells, and in different countries you'd have nationalized post offices who became telcos. So they weren't really consumer focused, these companies. They didn't really understand this idea of what do people really want. So they didn't know how to communicate with their customers. And what happened was this late 90s, effectively, telco exploded. And they were in a situation where they were expanding rapidly, but they didn't know anything about their customers or how to market to them. So you had that situation where even if they didn't bother understanding their customers, they would still be making a lot of money. So a very strange situation in telco at that time, that these companies were extremely successful, but really didn't understand what the pain points of their customers were. And therefore, sort of around about the late 90s, when the competition started to increase and, the market started to plateau, they then started investing in, okay, we actually need to do our marketing and branding a little bit better. And that's where I got involved in the communication side, helping them with that. Because before that, I'd lived in Japan for a while and was teaching English out in Japan in the mid 90s. And I'd seen like young Japanese teenagers in the mid 90s take up and adopt these phones and use text messaging before it was even charged by the telecom operators. So in those, if you remember in the old days, the first text messages were actually only ever used by engineers.
Yeah.
They used to send these network text messages like test, ignore, you get it on your phone. What was that? And then young people started realizing that they could send messages to each other without paying, because at the time it was like $1 a minute or 50 cents a minute. So they could send these messages on their phone, like these crypted messages, and bypass the payments. And that's how text messaging started. And it started in the mid 90s in Japan and spread to the rest of the world. I saw that happen. And then I went to these telcos, and in moving back to London at the time in the late 90s, knocking on their doors and saying, hey, I've seen the future of your brand and your marketing strategy. And they told me, we don't do kids. We're not interested. This was 1998.
Yeah.
None of them were interested in teenagers. And I said, this is the future. Teenagers have mobile and cell phones. No, not interested. But I have to say that the first company, and this gives me hope, this sort of brings me to podcasting, the first company, it was about Christmas 98, 99, I think. I can't remember. There was myself and my business partner. We got a phone call. We weren't making any sales, Grant. We were like, it was like Christmas Carol. I don't know if we're going to be able to, it's Tiny Tim. I don't know if we're going to be able to feed the family at Christmas. We got a phone call at our office, and there was only two of us, so hardly an office. It was a table in a basement. Got a phone call. Company said, we've seen your report that you're selling about young people and mobile phones. We really like it. We want to buy it. We're not a mobile phone company, but can we have it? I said, absolutely, need the money. And it turned out to be MTV.
Oh, wow.
And in 98, they were a big thing, remember?
Yeah, for sure.
Different today, but they became our first and best client for many, many years. And that really got me into the world of communications and how to connect with people across age, cultural, geographical divides. I really learned all of that, working with companies like MTV and later with Red Bull, Disney, some great brands, understanding how they do communications. And that really set me up later on in life to get into podcasting, because the challenges are very similar. It's how do we connect? across the pond, like, different time zones, like different backgrounds, everything. And that's really what people are digging into now.
Oh, without question. As far as the collapsing of time and space, right? I think through COVID, what did people say? What did you learn? Well, you learned that you can communicate, internationally a lot easier than you could before, and that people are a lot closer together than we appear to be, right? And through communications, through that type of technology, you can connect real time with just anybody in the world. It's a matter of just setting up a shared protocol, right? Right. Not to get too technical, but now you go through this MTV. You're saved, right? You had the big Christmas, right? Scrooge is no longer at your door. and this is a great story. This is a wonderful story. So now you get your sea legs, right? Now you're going. You said earlier you got the company built, then you sold it, and you went on this journey. You've been 6 years. I mean, so help us understand how did that intersect with this podcasting world?
Well, something funny happened whilst I was enjoying life, as a location independent nomad with the family traveling around the world. I actually got quite lonely. And I think if you're an entrepreneur, Grant, and I'm sure your audience will understand, is that we're wired a little bit differently. We are driven by the challenge. When something is a challenge, that actually is the reason why you want to do it. If it's easy, it's like, nah. But if it's a challenge, it's like, yeah, I want to do that just for the sake of doing it. And that's something that I don't think people who aren't wired like that don't understand so much. There is something exciting and rewarding about adversity and maybe even suffering, going through that process and becoming a better person on the other side of it. So when you're lying on tropical islands and you're seeing these sort of Instagram sunsets, which I was living that lifestyle for a while, it actually gets quite boring. And you start, the chatter in your head starts taking over. It's like, okay, I need some resistance. I need something to do. I need to create something. I need to reach out to people. So around about 2014, in a couple of years into the journey, I was living off the west coast of Africa in the Canary Islands, which are technically part of Spain, but they're geographically part of Africa. So they're volcanoes, like a mini Hawaii.
Yeah.
And 200 kilometers off the west coast. Living out there, poor internet connection, just living a really sort of sedentary lifestyle. But then, thinking, actually, how do I reach out to people like me? How do I connect with people like me and there were a lot of people living this kind of lifestyle, whether it was in Asia or in the Canary Islands. So I decided to start a podcast. And at the time, 2014, people hadn't really heard of it. Of course, it was a lot harder to do then, but it was easy to get hold of people, So I started a podcast interviewing nomads and people living this lifestyle all in different time zones. And it was really a hobby. And then that grew and, it kind of waxed and waned.
I'm curious, what was the name of the show? I mean, what did you call it?
Well, there was two versions, two series of it. The first one was called Barefoot Journal. So it was sort of the journal of being a barefoot entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't really, I had given up my business, but I was still an entrepreneur. I was still looking for opportunity in the next thing. So that was the first part. And then later on, it became more professionalized, became Founder FM. So I started, because in 2016, the startup scene was really hot globally. Right. So I was talking to startup founders. And then when we moved to Asia in 2016, 2017, I started a podcast called Asia Tech Podcast, because at the time, the Asian tech scene was really hot. It was borrowing, learning from America, the Valley. China was growing very fast. These Southeast Asian economies were getting a lot of venture capital funding. I was living in Japan, so I started Asia Tech Podcast, and I did 503 episodes of that.
Nice.
It was like this, reaching out to people like Grant and saying, hey, tell me about your startup. Just getting all their stories.
Yeah.
And then that just grew. It just took its own life. And then, just really grew fast. And the audience grew. The people wanted to be on the podcast. And then people saying, hey, I need to do that myself. How do I do that? And then this thought got into me, Grant, when I was sort of semi-retired, living in Japan, that actually I could make a business out of this. And it was almost like it had called me and said, I'm not going to let you get away from being an entrepreneur. Here's an opportunity for you, and you've got to grasp it. And I did. And at the time, 2018, it was still early in the podcast story. But there were people who were interested in it commercially, and that's how it started.
Man, that's a great story. I know people that were involved like 2014, 2015, very small, right? You always think like this is a one-man radio show, right? Kind of just doing their thing, and late night having a guest on like Johnny Carson. We'll just do some late night podcasting, right? And bring somebody on, get some entrepreneur out there that can't sleep at night. Like, yeah, I can jump on there. I'll go ahead and tell my story. That is wonderful. And because now you created a whole business out of this, teaching other people how to create a successful podcast and to monetize. We're in our financial empowerment series right now. So how did that happen? How did you tell us that story?
Well, I'd moved from Japan to Singapore. So the family, we upsticked and moved to Singapore because I wanted to start a business. So 2018, we came here, set up a podcast studio. There wasn't a lot of demand, I have to confess, in the early days. People were in 2018 saying to us, why podcast? Why not YouTube? That was very much how people thought about it because, this was pre-Spotify, Spotify existed, but it wasn't the entity it is now. Spotify was music really then. Pre all the investments we've seen go into podcasting and the celebs and the big hit, shows like Serial and so on. So in 2018, it was early days and we were grafting, looking around for leads, deals, and there wasn't a lot. And in my sort of podcast studio, I would invite people in to continue that Asia Tech podcast vibe. And so I get connection. So, this is the point, putting out to the audience. It's still a fantastic way to network with people, sit with somebody and have that conversation. One of the guests that came said, I'll take you to some Singaporean local food hangout. So we went there, and the place we went is for anybody that knows Singapore, it's called Newton Hawker Centre. It's like this large area where you can sit and eat. So we were sitting there having our dinner. It was packed. There was no seats left. And this couple came over, and we were chatting about the podcast at the time. This couple came over and said, can we sit there? These were the last two seats in the house. So we said, yeah, sure. We moved our bags and they went off. They came back and the guy started talking to us. And, we got chatting about podcasting, got chatting about what we're doing. And he asked my friend what he did. My friend was working in medical devices. He asked me about my podcast studio and, why are you trying to help companies start podcasts in Asia? Then I asked him, what do you do? And he said, I own an airline. And they're sitting right next to me. Yeah, this guy. So the guy in question is called Tony Fernandez. And he's a sort of a maverick billionaire businessman, sort of Mark Cuban level in the US maybe, or, a little bit of a controversial character.
So you're telling me you went to lunch with him, sat down and had a bite. You didn't know he was this. He probably loved that. He probably loved that.
He laughed. I mean, he's the kind of guy that, he will hang out with just average people, normal people on their daily lives just because he enjoys doing it. He's not sort of airs and graces.
Yeah.
So anyway, we got talking and, the hour was up. His private jet was waiting at the airport. So his man came and said, okay, we've got to get the cab. And I turned around to him. I thought, what am I going to do? I've got to pitch this guy. This is the last time I'm ever going to see him. And he has not just an airline, he has a whole media empire, he has record labels, everything. this is my opportunity. And I turned to him and said, Tony, I want to do a podcast with you. That was my pitch. And I could have gone in and said, yeah, I want you to be my client. But I knew everybody was going to be saying that. Or I want you to invest in my company. I knew he would have thousands of people, but I said, I want to do a podcast with you. And he sort of, breathed in and he said, sure, let's do it. And he gave me his WhatsApp number, right?
Yeah.
He said, let's make it happen. And that was it. And I thought, that's the one. That's how you do it. It's such a powerful biz dev tool. I've got an hour with this guy now to do a podcast and really go deep with him. So a few months later, it took a while to sort out. We flew into the airport. So they're based out of Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia, which is sort of it's the center point in the whole of Asia for logistics and airlines. So they're based out of there. We flew in. AirAsia, of course, they paid for the tickets.
Yeah.
And we did the podcast. And afterwards, we just got chatting. And he said he wanted to start a podcast business. So he said, I want to start my podcast and you guys are going to do it. So
wonderful.
That was the first client we got. The first client we got.
That's two. You got two. You get MTV. And you're sitting there, probably in your shorts, wondering, where you're going to be able to afford new pants. And here you are.
You got to put yourself out there, Grant.
You got to put yourself out there. You got
to put yourself out there. Like to your audience, it's like, sometimes that one deal is just around the corner. You got to put yourself out there, and just have faith that it will come. And that's what happened with Tony. You've got to put yourself out there and be receptive and network. And podcasting is a great way to network. For your listeners, you think about how else could I have played that differently? I could have said to him, like, I'm going to pitch you now. He would have just turned off.
Right.
Now think about that with all those leads, prospects that you have out there, the business owners who, they've all got those kind of maybe conversations in their pipeline, or people who are starting their own business, or if you're a consultant, you've got important and big leads out there. How do you get to them? This is such a great way of doing it. Learn from my story is, okay, it worked for me. I think it can work for a lot of people. I'm not necessarily a great salesperson.
Oh no, it's worked. I learned that story, right? I've been, in sales professional, 20, 25 years. I remember when email was new, right? Yeah. I before that, we were sending out snail mail, right? Knocking on doors and leaving brochures with the receptionist. That was your thing, right? And then the email came, like, wow, I could send out hundreds of emails. I mean, when it first came out, people were like opening them up, and it was really cool. Now, man, you can't get an email through to anybody. Then the phone call. You pick up the phone, ask for somebody. I know people now, they don't even answer their business phone. Yeah. Like, I already know who's on the other line. I'm not even going to pick that up. So if you don't have a person's mobile number, you're almost out of gas. The likelihood of them picking up the phone, actually listening to your voicemail has, just nosedive as to when it first started. So I decided last year, I'm going to do a podcast and do the exact same thing that you said. I'm going to have interesting guests. I'm going to then offer those guests to come onto the show and have a genuine conversation. Let's talk about it. No, ulterior motive or anything like that, but it opens up communications and networking, right? And it's opened up my world exponentially. So I am a big fan of podcasting, but I hear people ask me all the time, it's like, well, how do you get sponsors, true sponsors, to actually give you money to do a show? So tell us more about that.
Well, I work in the B2B space, so where the audience, the ideal listener, are business individuals. I mean, they're not businesses, they're individuals. So this would apply if you're a consultant, if you're a coach, if you're a startup founder, if you're any of the above, and you're selling to other businesses or business leaders. When it comes to sponsorship, I tell people that you already have a sponsor for your podcast, you. So you already are the advertiser on your podcast, and treat it like that. because your ability to use that podcast to upsell your services, whatever those may be, or your product is huge. You're not going to get a more cost-effective and more authentic advertising platform than the one you have right now, which is the one where you are there as the voice and the face of the company. And you're building a relationship not only with the audience, but with all these potential partners who are guests as well. There's a lot of focus on money podcast, and we should really think about, I mean, if you're in the B2C space where you're creating advertising real estate, so let's say you're creating a true crime podcast or a history podcast or a sports podcast, where your goal is to get the eyeballs and earballs of your audience and then sell to an advertiser, that's different. But if you are in the business world, you should always think of yourself as the advertiser and then think, okay, how do I use this now to sell my services? Because probably the likelihood is your service is conceptual. You know, it's not an off-the-shelf product. You might be selling a course, or you might be selling yourself in your time as well. So it takes time for somebody to make a decision about that. And what a great way. Now people, we used to go to the About Us pages of the websites. Now people go and check out the podcast. Let's go and find out about Grant. What's he all about? I'm sure people listening now may, you know, if they would go to my website, the first thing they'll do is check out the podcast because they want to know more. You know, if they're really interested, this is a really authentic way of, you know, discovering the person selling these services. How, you know, compare that to the brochure, right, that we talked about or in the old days.
That's such an old way of doing it. What you just said, that's my playbook, right? That is the whole reason I started the podcast, Follow the Brand. I had a business, 5-star BDM. How can I effectively market my company? And yes, I can invest in a lot of different ads, you know, social media ads, but it's a one-way, I call it a spray and pray type of way. And I'm not saying, you know, you shouldn't advertise, you know, there's certain ways of doing certain things, but when you're new and people don't know you very well, they're not familiar with the brand, and there's a lot of noise out there. You know, you don't want to be just that one more pitch that they will not listen to, you know. So if a person's going to tune into a podcast, this is my thinking, they're going to invest time. They're going to invest 20, 30, 40 minutes, you know, listening to a podcast that I am presenting with spectacular guests like yourself. That means that they're interested. And then I've created in my podcast different advertisements built in, commercials that I've created to tell you about the company that sponsors the podcast. So you're exactly right about, you know, the purposes of that. And it has worked as far as getting, you know, new clients, people that are interested, because I'm showing them what it is that I'm doing and giving knowledge and expertise. Just like now, I applaud you for what you have done. And I believe that everybody has a story. Everybody has an interesting story. You have an interesting story that I'm continuously and continue to listen to, because I like how you just said that. It's like, hey, I'm just not going to show you how to go out and, you know, get XYZ to sponsor your podcast. No, you are the sponsor. You create it. And if you do it at a good enough level, and let's talk about this. I mentioned this even earlier before we went live. It's that there's a lot of podcasts out there.
This episode is brought to you by 5-Star BDM. 5-Star BDM is a professional consulting and advisory group keenly focused on business development services for small to mid-sized businesses and entrepreneurs. Although every business is unique, they often share challenges that can be addressed through smart branding. Services include process improvement in operations, digital strategy and transformation, business intelligence, digital marketing, and personal branding. Our 5-Star business and personal branding company has helped a number of professionals and organizations to optimize and grow. The result is more business, more opportunities, better reach, positive outcomes. please visit www.fivestarbdm.com to learn more and view all the episodes of Follow the Brand.
Some
4 million.
4 million for it. That's a lot. Some of them, you got the top level that are, I call, upper echelon, very well done, beautiful. And then you have those that you're like, oh my God, I wish they would not call that a podcast. You just stop.
That was my first one.
So there's some levels of professionalism that has to take place in a podcast setting. And when you're going to bring somebody like, I have conversations like, well, why do you want to do? First, you have to have that why. Why do you want to do this? And do you understand it is a time commitment? It's a lot of commitment of time, money, resources, and how are you going to leverage network to have a consistent stream of guests? If you're doing guests, some people don't do guests. It might be a one-on-one, but you've got to really think it through to be successful. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the commitment part is key here, Grant. And you've made the commitment. I think you have to go into this long term. You're building an asset. You talk about the show, which you advertise on it yourself. What a great asset that is. And unlike advertising on somebody's website or on a search page, you own it. So you can take it and do whatever you want with it. And guess what? 10 years from now, people can still be listening to this episode. How wonderful is that? Think about the return on that investment. Because we're sort of trained, Grant, I feel, in the social media world, this social media fire hose that we have to fight with every day. You think about Twitter or LinkedIn as an example. You post, you get some likes. Tomorrow you start all again. Start from zero. You post to get some likes, start all again. And that's it. It's the casino of attention, right? It's working against us. You can never beat the house, so to speak, in the casino, right? And it's working against us because it doesn't want us to build assets. Because if we can build assets, then we control everybody's attention. And it doesn't work like that on social media platforms. They own the attention. They own the commodity. So if you want to build an audience, if you want to earn attention, you have to build an asset, and that's hard work. You have to step outside of social media a little bit. I don't think a podcast has social media. I think it's connected to it. Obviously, use social media, but you have to step outside. It's like writing a book or creating a podcast. It's commitment. It's creating an asset that's going to last a lifetime. And therefore, committing to 40, 50 episodes, that's going to last you for years and years. You're going to get payback. You're going to get people come to you and say, Grant, yeah, I know Grant. He's the guy that does that podcast. And you probably don't know this person. You've never met them. You'll get people at conferences walk up to you. Now that we're back in conference season, right? It's all starting again. Yeah, man, I listened to your podcast. That's like amazing. You get people come up to you that, they don't even know what you look like, but they know you, right?
Yeah, true.
And that's the wonder of creating, something that's really authentic. And I think that is the power of a podcast compared to advertising. Advertising has its space for sure.
Yep.
Pay-per-click has a real, it's a very powerful tool, but this is top of funnel. This is about influencing, not acquiring. What a great way to influence people in your network.
You said it right there, top of funnel. And the fact, what I realize is that now I've created a library, my own bookshelf. And in like my case, I have seasons, right? So I have a personal branding season that goes on in the summer. I have a business development season that's in the fall. I have career development that's in the winter, and then financial empowerment in the spring. And so that becomes now a playbook that I continuously can utilize and repurpose for a lot of different things, not just the podcast, because it's recorded. I have the audio, I have the video. I can then, reimagine a lot of those different things for different purposes. Maybe I'm going to now be live, right, on and going to a conference, and now I've got to have content to give them to go ahead and brand myself. So I can create that, right? Create that and put it out there. I also noticed you brought up another good thing. I've now learned how to use the social media for my benefit, meaning I already know when I create a podcast and put it out on Twitter, let's just say, it's going to be top of feed because Twitter is top of feed. When I put it out on LinkedIn, it's going to be top of feed or a Facebook or Instagram. I already know this. Wow, you know what? I can control the content that's coming out. If someone specifically looking something around my podcast, or they're going to Google, let's say, my name, I already know what's going to appear. I control that because I know how they work. It's like, this is wonderful. So I can bring traffic to me. But I also love how you said that keyword, ownership. You own the platform. So you're not waiting for it to go live or anything of that nature. You control the asset. It's yours. I tell people all the time, that's why you need to own your own website. You need to have that. That's yours, that you license. It's yours, that you can do what you need to do with it. Because if Facebook shuts down or something like that, you're not completely shut down. God forbid, your hosting site goes down, but still, the asset is there. So you bring up some very, very key points about how you can direct this particular platform to be used by you at your discretion to create the type of environment that you're looking for.
Yeah. The importance of building a system around all of that is key. A lot of people go into podcasting because it's exciting, but they don't do the groundwork that you're talking about, Grant. I talk about it. So one of the things I do is help people guest on other people's podcasts. And it's a great way to get in the game. It's an on-ramp to starting your own podcast in the future as well. And it's great now that there are podcasts like yourself out there who've built and nurtured communities. So, whatever your thing is, whatever your niche is, there are now podcasts out there. What I find is that one of the important parts, I break it down as a stage story system, a stage being the podcast, story being your storytelling and the narrative. And then system is what we're talking about here, Grant. It's that, how do you create a system around podcasting so that it works for you? How do you build an asset? How do you build a workflow? And a lot of that is overlooked. People have the stage and the story. They can work all that out, but they don't have a system to convert all that effort into, outputs that move the needle on your business, right? Move the gauge. So the system part really comes down to building an asset. And you've nailed it, talking about having a website. And then what I talk about in the system is the omnichannel approach to podcasting. Is you think of your podcast episode as the mother lode of content, right? You think about that as your starting point. Because what people tend to do, I see this a lot with entrepreneurs, is that they have all these different channels in social and the website and then the podcast and then the newsletter. And they're all vaguely aligned, but, I have to do the newsletter now. It's Sunday and I've got to do my LinkedIn for the week. And then I've got to do my Twitter post. And it's all different things going on and they're different paces. Omnichannel really means you do once, which is you do the podcast. And then from that, you get all these content derivatives. So one podcast, like you do, can create video snippets. It can create transcripts. You can create a 9 to 12 page PDF of the transcript. And a transcript costs $100 to get done now. There's plenty of services that do it for you and clean it up. Give that away as a lead magnet, something, a freebie you can give away on your website, a list builder. A podcast can create an article, which is great for SEO. And then you've got all the derivatives that you can post over social media. So what this does for the entrepreneur is not necessarily reduce the work time, because it still requires work, but it reduces the decision fatigue of making decisions about what do I post where and what do I post next. The beauty of doing something like guesting is, let's say you do 4 episodes, or even your own podcast, 4 episodes a month, 1 a week. Every week you've got this kind of rhythm section to your orchestra or your band, your jazz band, which is just beating. It's the beat, it's the metronome, it's the conductor, whatever it is, the drummer. And that is the beat, which is your podcast goes out every week. And from that, everything falls into place. I think it's so important because we waste so much time thinking, what am I going to post? What am I going to say? What happens next? And if you take all of that away and you just focus on doing the podcast, it frees up a lot of creative energies lost on stuff that really doesn't matter.
Oh my God. And what you just said, around, think about this, audience. Like, you came out with a new product, a new service, a new recognition. You do it one time, right? You've already got it in audio and you got it in video. And like you just said, you can easily transcribe it into written form. And then you can utilize that asset over and over again to launch. Now you've got your launch pad out there, because people consume their social media differently. There's all kinds of different channels that are out there. But if you can do it once, that one-to-many type approach, then you start saying, okay, what's the time and money and commitment, and you do a quick ROI, of what I would have to do in place of. It starts to make a lot of sense, and then you can craft your message so someone's not having to discern what it is that you're doing or what is this product. So it's up to you how you want to display it, how you want it projected, how do you want it told, and then you own the story. I like how you said the narrative. I love that.
You mentioned something very important there, Grant, about the one-to-many part. And you will have realized the limitations, and I've realized the limitations in growing a business, and your audience as well, going through this, is that the most valuable part of your business, because you're not a Microsoft, for most people, the business is Grant, and that's the experience that we have of your business, right? It's you, and we trust you, and we like you, we know you, and that's why we're buying from you. And we will listen to you because you're taking us on this journey. And that is the case for many, many businesses. And that's a really powerful asset in the business. However, the flip side of that is the most valuable part of your business is the least scalable. Like, there's only one Grant.
Right.
We can't clone you. We haven't worked out how to do it yet. The AI isn't up to scratch yet. So as of today, there's only one of you. And that becomes the natural limit of the business. However, podcasts allow us to scale. They allow us to create that authentic conversation we're having now at scale. It's like we're having a coffee, sitting around the table. Hopefully the listener's sitting with us as well. We're just having a chat. But we're doing it to thousands of people across time zones. That's the authenticity at scale that podcasting can provide. And the fact that, your content is out there for years to come, the ROI is significant. So I would look at it from that respect, is that, to scale a business, any business, you need leverage of sort, in investment terms, you need to be able to increase the ROI beyond its current level. And the problem is of being an entrepreneur is that you can't, your outcome today is the result of your best strategies that you're employing, right? Correct. So the only way to get beyond that is leverage. You outsource, you delegate, you hire somebody, you invest. And that's where we are with podcasting, because what it allows us to do is it allows a listener, they may be listening now, you're listening now, listener, right? You're hearing us, but you're here with us, but you're not physically here with us. Grant could be asleep. I could be in a meeting. Grant could be flying somewhere. I could be asleep. Who knows? But we're having a conversation with you. Yeah. That's the power. We still can have these intimate conversations with people all over the world whilst we're not physically truly there, and they feel connected to us. And I think that is something only now, as a result of coming out of this pandemic, do we really understand the value of that. And that's something that I think won't go away, that we need more and more today, that connection, that real human connection.
Well, this has been wonderful, what we're sharing. And I already know that we got our, like you started earlier about those entrepreneurs that can't sleep at night. They're sitting on the beach and they're looking for their next adventure. And that could be a lot of different things. And I encourage you definitely to tune in to what Graham Brown has. You've been doing it for a while, doing what I've been doing now for a while. And that is that, how do I get my voice heard? How do I get it out there in a meaningful way that people will tune into? You attract your audience and like, wow, that you're on to something, man. You said it earlier about you're seeing small kids, teenagers in Japan, doing this thing now we know as texting, which is now a worldwide, phenomenon. You're going to see things that as we go into this, NFT metaverse world, what is that going to look like? That's a whole new business opportunity, a whole new branding opportunity. What is that going to look like? And where is the podcast going to set in that? And we all know that the power of the spoken word is very, very magnetic. Very, very magnetic. And if you can control your voice and be able to clearly articulate your vision, and as you said, you get into a timelessness zone. You can always tune in. I hope I'll be, like you may be like the Beatles, since you're from England. We're going to throw on that old Beatles track and you kind of go back in time. Or throw on this episode of Follow the Brand. So for we're going to wrap up now. Is there any thoughts, anything that we have not really talked about that's itching in you that you want to tell the audience about podcasting and why it's important that we haven't touched on? What would you like to leave us with?
I feel that you just said it, Grant, that we really value that human connection, that the power of story and how that is timeless. I always think, for example, if you go back to some of the great speeches of yesteryear, even people like Martin Luther King, when he stood up on the Lincoln Memorial, and he didn't stand up. And this, I think, is advice for anybody out there in public speaking. He didn't stand up in front of the crowd and said, "I have a plan." No, he didn't. He gave that famous "I have a dream" speech. And you think about the power of that, the vision, and how that was communicated through story, that some people in this world, through maybe fear or habit, would rather give us the PowerPoint presentation. But I think you have to be brave. You have to take on the vulnerability of getting on stage and putting yourself out there, like King did, right? And look at the power of that and how that transformed society. And still today, those words are still as powerful as they were in the 60s as they are today. And that, that could be your Beatles analogy as well. That the word audio lasts for 50, 60 years. People are still playing Beatles songs now. We're still listening to King and influenced by it. And that's why we need to get out there. We need to find a stage. And the word stage itself, from Latin, means to stand. It's to take a stand, to stand up, stand for something, whatever it is, even if that something is your B2B niche, but you stand for something and have a voice. And that's what I put to everybody there. I challenge your audience to do that.
Oh my God. Yeah, I love that. That was wonderful, because he who does not stand for anything will fall for everything. So this is an opportunity to stand up, have your voice heard, and have a vision. What's your point of view? Why would somebody really want to listen to you? And I think if you step back, and sometimes you got to do some strategizing about that, and think, what is the purpose that I'm really trying to achieve? What is my why? And how does that truly help another individual? And I think when you really have that story locked in, man, your podcast will take off. Yeah. So Graham, if my audience would like to contact you, what is the best way?
Go to my personal website, that's a jumping off point if you want to find out about podcast guesting or podcasting or storytelling. So my website is Graham D. Brown. So it's Graham D. Get the D in there, otherwise you get the wallpaper company. GrahamDBrown.com.
Well, we'll definitely not get the wallpaper company. We'll see what you're doing. You're also available on LinkedIn. I see you on LinkedIn a lot.
Add me.
And I totally appreciate you coming on to the show and spending some time with me. And I'll tell the whole audience, you can view all the episodes on Follow the Brand at www.5starbdm. That's B for brand, D for development, and M4masters.com. And thank you very much again, Mr. Brown, for coming on to the show. You take care.
It's been a real pleasure. Thank you, Grant.
Absolutely.